Okay, well, here we are. Welcome to our celebrity interview. I'm very pleased today to have one of my favorite people. Mike Osterling is here. He has 19 years of experience in lean. The majority of his lean experience was originally in manufacturing, but as of late, he's in all kinds of environment, including commercial construction, agricultural, financial services, and government. Currently, Mike is president of Osterling Consulting. He's also authored a couple of books that I've got on my shelf and has been teaching in the Lean Enterprise Certification Program for working professionals at San Diego State University College of Extended Studies. Well, welcome, Mike. Let me get out of this share mode here, and it's good to see you here.
It's good to be here. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be fun. Mike and I, get to spend a little bit of time. He's been to our Lean Summit and has done presentations here at Cal Poly, so it's always great to have him. So, Mike, let's go ahead and start and tell us a little bit about what your current position is in relationship to Lean. And it sounds like a lot of us in the Lean community got a lot of things going on. So. You don't necessarily have to narrow it down to just one thing.
Yeah, there's no shortage of things going on, that's for sure. I primed you with some of the stuff that you shared already, but just to keep the flow going, I'm an independent consultant. I've had my own business for the last 15 years now, and like you said, I teach at San Diego State University Lean Enterprise certification program. We're in our 16th year now, which is really cool because it's 100% working professionals, and it's really cool because we get to engage with people from all different parts of the community, whether it's the Navy, financial services, good old traditional manufacturers, or just a whole bunch of different types of environments. I'm very involved with
Mike,
the association.
Mike,
go ahead.
Before you go on, so these guys have been now sort of exposed to this whole green belt, black belt, Lean Six Sigma thing. So this is a certification program that's like a university certificate program, if you will. Is that?
Yes, it is, but it's through extended studies.
Right.
So it's not through the regular university, and it's all, I'm trying to think in the 16 years if we've had a matriculated student in there or not. None that come to mind.
Okay. All right,
yeah.
good.
So it's pretty cool because you get a whole cross-section of people in there. I mean, there's all these big little companies down here, like TaylorMade Golf that makes the golf clubs, and Tailored Guitars that makes tailored guitars, and and it's cool because a lot of these guys will host classes on site, just one or two of the 16 sessions, and we get to go in and we get to play around in their environment and see what people are doing. So it's actually been a really neat way to stay in touch, one way to stay in touch with the community and see companies go through their transformation. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
So I do a bunch of stuff, whether it's I speak, I've authored a couple books, and things like that. So I think you hit most of this stuff already.
Okay. All right, Mike. Well, let's see. So one of the things we always ask our celebrity interview people is, tell us a little about your lean journey, right? When did you get the bug? When did you drink the Kool-Aid and get on the lean bandwagon? And how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'll keep it short. I've got a bunch of years behind me, but I'll keep the story short, all right?
Yeah.
I actually worked for a company called Square D Company, also known as Schneider Electric, for 18 years. And I worked in a variety of roles: materials management, supply chain planning. Most of it was in manufacturing management. I ran a facility for a while. And one of our VPs back in the mid-90s came out from Kentucky. He was based in Lexington, and he said, have you guys ever heard about this Toyota production system stuff? And I'd heard about it because I actually got my master's, my MBA at San Diego State in international management. But being an ops guy, I took a bunch of ops classes as part of that curriculum. And I had a professor, Dr. Chen, who had been he'd been over to Japan a number of times, and he was teaching us these Japanese production techniques. He wasn't really teaching it as a system, but he was teaching it as a bunch of tools, which was wonderful. He was ahead of his time, big time. So that would have been in the like 1990, something like that.
Yeah.
And I was working at the time, so I got to play around. We actually implemented Kanban and things like that. Back in my first Kanban system, I think was in 89 or 90 that I helped put in place. And so we were doing these tools, but then when we started getting into the lean stuff and we started understanding what this Toyota production system stuff was, we started recognizing them as a system. So when this guy came out from, the VP came out from Kentucky and said, "You ever heard of this stuff?" I was like, "Yeah, I've kind of heard of it." And he goes, "Well, you should go out and figure out what it means." And so a handful of us went out from the leadership team, went out and visited some plants. This was in 1997, and it was a week that changed my life for sure. Because one of the plants we visited was a Black & Decker plant that was making irons that we use at home to iron our clothes.
Right.
And we saw what these guys had done in a year. They do everything from casting the platen, which is the part that touches the clothes, all the way through final assembly. So it was a fab and assembly environment. And in a period of about a year, they opened up about half of their floor space.
Yeah.
And we heard these operators. I speak a fair amount of Spanish, and as we were going through the facility, there's one group that did a mini presentation to us, and it was operators and leads, and you couldn't shut them up. They were so excited about what they did.
Yeah, yeah.
And at that point in time, I was working in a facility of 1,300 people in a maquiladora down in Tijuana, Mexico, an assembly plant. And we had and I was guilty of the old traditional command and control type way of running an operation. And so I saw that, and I saw how engaged the people were, how excited they were, and their results. And it was just like, I came back, I told my boss, I said, "Ed, if you're serious about this stuff, I want to be part of the trip, part of the journey." So for the next 6 years, I was playing around internal with different plants, supply chain, corporate level, and just having a lot of fun. And that was my segue, or that was my foundation for going into the consulting world.
Yeah. Oh, neat. Yeah, I think all of us that have sort of been in this field, that is certainly a major turning point, is when you see the reaction of the people, and the good that it sort of does and improves in their lives and their reaction. That's in a lot of ways, it just sort of sells it for me right there.
Yeah, it's funny because you get different reactions. After people have been through the experience, the reaction is what I described. You can't shut them up. They're pumped up.
Right.
But when you're coming in and trying to,
change them.
Exactly, or excite them or get them to change themselves, it's pretty challenging, because we were at it for about a year, and we saw the same type of results internally that the Black & Decker guys saw. We opened up all kinds of space and improved productivity and cut scrap. I mean, it's the classic stuff you see if you Google it or you read a book. But then we said, boy, we can't just constrain it or limit it to the shop floor, because it's taken a week to get an order to the floor.
Yeah.
And we got to do something about sales and engineering and dock control and scheduling.
Yeah.
And so, you start talking to these guys, and they're like, yeah, that stuff's great out in the shop floor, but we're different.
Right.
And they are. And so one of the challenges, it continues to be a challenge, is figuring out how do you adapt to those different types of environments.
Yeah.
Hey, if you're making 10,000 irons a day and they're all identical, there's one way to adapt the tools. You go into another environment where you're making $500,000 machines a day, and every single one of them is engineered to order. It's unique to that customer. You have to adapt it differently. You got to adapt.
Right. No, so you mentioned the idea of challenge. So, like, in your current roles and the things you're doing, like, what's your current main challenge?
So one of the things one of my current main challenges is coaching executives in figuring out and understanding how to do critical problem solving. And transitioning them away from shooting from the hip. Most execs are what do we call it? A type A personality.
Yeah.
They're smart, they're quick, they get things done, and if you don't like what you heard the first time they said it, they'll say it to you again.
Yeah.
And with complex problems, it actually requires us to slow down.
Yeah.
And with the executive's role, and I'll even say this trickles down to different levels of the organization,
Yeah.
the role of the leader typically is not to fix things. The role of the leader is to help other people understand how to fix, well, it's to engage other people in the problem-solving process.
Right. Yeah.
So the challenge is you can't teach all this stuff in I'll spend a day with you or 2 days with you, and you'll be, a changed person, and you'll be Superman or Superwoman.
Yeah.
It takes time, and it's small intervals of coaching. And what we've learned is with small intervals of coaching and guidance and educating, it's more effective. So that's one of the things I've been working on with some colleagues, figuring out how to make that easier, better, more effective, and palatable for impatient executives.
Yeah. Do you do is it offline coaching, or do you kind of get right in the middle of the situation where the executives trying to work on a problem with some employees?
So we definitely, you don't learn unless you do.
Right.
So we can talk theory all day long, and maybe change what people believe, but I'm a believer that, it's great that you guys have projects because that's where you learn.
Yeah.
And you're forced to apply.
Right.
So the answer to your question is, we always have problems that they're working on, something defined.
Right.
And often we'll start out with some education piece up front and it's a bigger chunk, not everything, but a bigger chunk up front, just to kind of knock some sense out of them. And then it's doses over smaller doses over a period of time, because learning through doing, but it's complex problems, and you can't fix a complex problem in a day or two.
Right. Interesting.
In fact, it often takes months to go through these problem-solving cycles.
Okay.
So the challenge is getting on my calendar, getting on an executive's calendar, and because you don't necessarily, I can't tell you right now when the right time is to check in, because it's when they're ready to go to the next step is when we want to check their thinking and have those conversations. So it's a good challenge, but it's truly a challenge.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to see what the book comes out of this, So.
Oh, good Lord. Don't do that to me.
Well, let's see. So how about, we've all had our lean successes and maybe our lean failures, but we always try to learn a little bit from them. But what's one of your sort of bigger successes or failures, and what did you learn?
I'm going to try to briefly share one of each.
Okay.
One of the lean successes was actually, I'm down in San Diego. That's where I'm based. And one of the lean successes that I was partied to. Can you see my screen?
Oh yeah, we got it.
Cool. So was actually working with the Navy. There's a command down here called Southwest Regional Maintenance Center. This is a couple of years ago now, I guess. But anything that when a ship comes into port, anything that needs to be done, repair, overhaul, replacement, is done at this command at 32nd Street or Southwest Regional Maintenance Center, SWARMAC. And so it's kind of interesting because they've been on the journey for 10 years, and they go a little bit slower because of the organization.
Yeah.
We talk about culture change. The U.S. Navy's got, 230, 250 years of culture to undo. Yeah. So it takes a while to make some of those changes. But they were looking at this one overhaul process. When a ship comes in to port, they learned that one of the pacing items in getting those ships back out to sea was this thing called an accommodation ladder. And they looked at this accommodation ladder. They did a value stream map. I wasn't part of that, but they did a value stream map, and they said, you know what, it's taken us something like 66 days from the time the ship arrives until the accommodation ladder is overhauled and replaced. And this was just unacceptable because it's hard to be in harm's way when you're sitting in port.
Yeah.
So as an output of that value stream mapping activity, they said, and you can see here on this value stream map, this create the work plan, there's something like 27-day turnaround time, and the actual repair was even worse. It was something like 30-day turnaround time to repair the ladder. And so they did a Kaizen event. I wasn't part of it on the ladder repair, and they had that 30 days. I think it was down to 5 days or 6 days or something like that. Okay. But they also saw that they had some serious issues or big opportunities on this creating the work plan. There's engineering, planning, quality. There are a bunch of different parties in there. It was a process that required 20 signatures.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's pretty, those of us who think our tax dollars aren't hard at work, well, it's not true. They're hard at work, but maybe not doing all the right stuff, huh?
Yeah.
So we did they asked to do a rapid improvement event. They didn't want to call them Kaizen, and that's cool. I respect that. It was a rapid improvement event. And in that rapid improvement event, they wanted to focus on that creating the work plan.
Right.
Real long story short, and it took a lot of work and convince him before the actual event. But we ended up getting the quality officer in the event on the team, and he was one of the great resistors going into this because he and everybody else at the command said all 20 of those signatures were required by the law.
Right.
And the commander was like, no, it's impossible. I can't believe it. We've got to be able to turn a ship faster. And I refuse to believe the law says you need 20 signatures.
Yeah.
And the commander was right. And he was able to coax or coerce the quality officer into being on the team. And what these guys did in 3 days was mind-blowing. What they were able to do, they took that signatures required by just actually, within the event, we actually pulled up all the different regs and said, okay, what does it really say? Not what's tribal knowledge, what do we think, not what did Joe tell you, but what's it really say?
Right.
And they were able to get 20 signatures down to 4.
Wow.
And the other big thing on the top right here, their process time or actually work effort for each plan that they released, they were able to get that down from 46 hours per plan to 5 hours per plan.
Wow.
And as a result of those two things and some other significant improvements, like coming up with standard work, even some boilerplate type stuff that they didn't have in place before, they were able to take the lead time or turnaround time from putting together that plan from 27 days down to 2 days.
Right.
Which was, I mean, we did it on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. On Monday, they were running this new process.
Yeah.
And I keep saying they because I don't know nothing about their process.
Right.
I mean, I got an orientation to it, but as a facilitator, what I was driving was, hey, let's go through the steps of understanding the process, identifying where the gaps are, seeing what can be improved, and then seeing what it is we can actually do. And these guys rocked. I mean, and the quality officer was against it all along. You couldn't shut him up on the 3rd day. He was so pumped up about what they did. And he was like, when are we going to the next process? We did ladders. Now we need to do engines. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
So Mike, what is sort of the learning or the takeaway from this? This sounds like a great success story.
So that one of the big takeaways from that was everybody was against doing it. And it was only the commander of the command who believed that something could happen. And so he was very, very persistent in getting everybody together for the event.
Right.
Within the event, it wasn't, and we set this up, it's, hey, this consultant's not going to come in and fix your process. He doesn't know jack. And he's right.
Yeah.
It's, let's just be open-minded and let's keep it fact-based. Let's move away from opinions. Let's get the data. Let's look at the regs. What do they really say?
Right.
And exercising humility. Those guys know the job better than anybody else.
Yeah.
Exercise curiosity. What could we do? And that whole respect for people thing and just, recognizing that these guys were frustrated. They were pulling their hair out. So I think another one of the big takeaways is being able to put ourselves into the shoes of the people that are running the process on a day in, day out basis and saying from their perspective, what's the what's there, what's in it for me.
Right, right. Understand that. Excellent. I just want to point out to our students that are looking, we're heading in this week into the improvement phase of the DMAIC process and looking at that. And I think, reducing signatures from 20 down to 40, that's an improvement, right? It doesn't have to be a fancy Japanese word or a name like Kanban or whatever, but, if you could show me that you eliminated signatures, that's an improvement for this project. You've got to do two things like that, but that's excellent. You said, do you have another one, Mike, or do you
I've got a failure if you want it. That's where we learn our most lessons.
Yeah.
So I actually it was a relatively long-term engagement. I was supporting a colleague at a pharmaceutical facility, and I was there for significant amount of time, over 6 to 8 months. And it was corporate said, we're going to do it at every location. Yeah. And I was basically the henchman that came in to motivate everybody and get them to do it.
Yeah.
And what I learned there was, if continuous improvement or process improvement is optional, then if there's a non-believer at that level and below that level, you're probably not going to see real significant improvement or change.
Right.
In this case, the general manager of the operation he gave it all the lip service he could, but zero support. Yeah. And I think in looking back on that one from a lessons learned, they made some changes, but they didn't have a transformation.
Right.
And I think in looking back on that one, we would have taken a much more aggressive approach in escalating that issue. And we tried, but we didn't try hard enough. That's on us.
Right.
We should have escalated that above the general manager. And
yeah,
if you get people in a leadership position that aren't willing to do this stuff, and the organization needs to get it done, then you got to give people a chance. Yeah. We've got to give them the skills. We've got to motivate them. We've got to give them the resources. And if they're still not coming along, then there needs to be changes made, because you can't let one person hold an organization hostage.
Yeah, that's a good lesson. So, Mike, what's your favorite go-to tool or lean concept that you like to use? Do you have one?
It changes every year or two, I'll tell you. Okay. We get introduced to new stuff, and I think it's exciting to buy a new tool. I'm a fixer guy, so yeah. I look for projects. I go to Home Depot just for a justification. I need a pneumatic nail gun. Give me a project, okay? And that pneumatic nail gun is pretty cool. And now it's just part of the toolbox, and right. I understand how to use it. So from a lean perspective, and these aren't necessarily new tools, but they're good tools that continue. There's two that I come to mind, Eric. Probably the whole A3 problem solving, and that I was talking to you earlier about that remote or the coaching of execs, and now we're trying to adapt, and it's not much of an adaptation, but using A3s for complex problems to help people structure their thought process.
Right.
And using it as a way to develop people. We talk about problem owners and problem coaches. And so it's really cool from a coaching perspective to how do we develop A3 or problem solving coaches.
Right.
So that's been a good one. Have you guys talked about that much in the class, Eric, yet?
We've talked about it a little bit, because we're the structure on this course is the Lean Six Sigma. Of course, we're using the DMAIC process,
Absolutely.
define, measure, analyze, improve, control, which has its parallels in A3 thinking. So if we get people to think like that, that's probably our main objective through this course. And
DMAIC and A3s are very, very similar. I mean, you can say they're just it's a structured approaches to going through the scientific method or scientific approach improvement. I think one of the cool things about A3, and I hope everybody out there that's doing DMAIC as an organization, they kind of latch onto this idea of, okay, maybe it's not an A3 coach, maybe it's a DMAIC coach.
Right.
And asking these critical Socratic coaching questions as we go, as the owner of the project, as they go through each of the different phases.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So that's one of the things and the other is leader standard work.
Ah, okay. I haven't heard about that one yet.
Leader standard work's pretty exciting. We say, hey, there's best ways to do all these things, and if we go into a call center or a manufacturing shop floor or something like that, the front lines, hey, 90% of their day is executing standard work, right?
Right, right.
And if you look at that next level up, whether it's a lead or a supervisor, there's probably certain things, maybe not 100% of their day, but a certain percentage of their day that they're supposed to be doing certain routines.
Right.
Whether it's replenishing, checking, training, auditing, reports, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's only 50% of their day is standard work. So let's see if we can identify what those critical things are that the lead or supervisor is supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And that keeps going up. It goes up to a manager.
Right.
And if we look at this on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, the routines might not be every tact time.
Right.
But it might be every week. I'm supposed to do a skip level meeting with somebody that reports to my direct report. Or once a week, every day I want to go out and walk the line with a certain routine or whatever that frequency is.
Right.
And so leader standard work is actually it's an interesting way to minimize the disruption when we change supervisors.
Right.
Or managers. It's a great way to drive consistency across the organization. And it's a really cool way to I'm going to say standardize and systemize things like performance checks. How is this process running?
Right.
How's our standard work doing? And things like that. So leader standard work's pretty, it goes into that leadership realm again, but it's, which makes the leaders really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's interesting stuff. So those are a couple that I've been having a lot of fun with lately, A3s and leader standard work.
Yeah. No, one of the things the students in this class have to do is they have to watch some videos, and there's a TED Talk video by Bill Peterson. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's called Lean Applied to Us. And he goes through the 7 ways and takes it down to sort of a human level, how you can sort of use those things and apply them in your daily life. But I can imagine that being part of a standard work routine. And we'll talk to students a little bit about that after we're finished up with you here. But
and you said that's Bill Peterson as a TED Talk. What was the name of the talk? Do you remember?
Lean Applied to Us.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's about road to human potential and the customer's you, and it's kind of interesting. But what I want to do now is I want to switch over to our students. We've been about 24 minutes in on this talk, and I want to give them a chance to ask you some questions. So if you got a question for Mike, you want to go ahead and raise your hand. I'll go ahead and recognize you, and we can quiz Mike a little bit, see if he really knows his stuff. So let's see here. We'll give him a second. Yeah, Judy, what's your question?
Well, first of all, thank you for taking questions and for talking with us. I'm kind of intrigued by this leader standard work notion. My company is currently going through a transition process, and so I'm watching the bits that are seem to be lean and the bits that seem not to be. And one of the things that has struck me as we went through this is basically how little the consultants who are leading the effort seem to know about our process. They seem to know about some standard processes for a company of our sort. but they didn't really take a lot of time to develop any understanding of what's the same and what's different. And it's not, it's only to a minor degree a prescriptive process that we're going through, even though it is a merger. So I guess I'm curious to know how much, as you're coaching people to set up standard processes and make them repeatable and measurable and so forth, how much do you need to know about the people you're coaching or the company you're coaching, particularly in smaller companies where there's sometimes some processes that are unique to that particular company, but it's their focus. I mean, you could make them standard, but then they wouldn't be that company anymore, you know?
So I think I understand your question. Thank you, Judy, and I'm happy to be here. So
rambled along. I was
no, that's good. Good description. I think I got it, and we'll find out in a second here. So I'm a believer that, first of all, managers, for the most part, shouldn't fix processes. And the reason I say that is because managers don't really understand the process. And that's only magnified when we start talking about consultants. You don't want consultants fixing processes. And I'm not saying that that's what's happening at your organization. What we need to be good at doing is understanding and being able to facilitate and grease the skids for, we need to understand the process of improvement and make sure that we're engaging making sure that the right people are engaged, and making sure that we're following the right steps of the right process. I think it might be more important for consultants. I got to think about this one. I might get myself in trouble when I say this, but I almost wonder if it makes more sense for consultants to have a better understanding of the personalities and the organizational personality than it does for the consultants to actually understand the processes at a detailed level. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, I should have an idea what's going on. Let me tell you a really, really short story. So working with a livestock company, these guys have, I hope there's no vegetarians out there. If there are, pretend we're not talking about cattle. But these guys have, 200,000 head of cattle that they are growing, if you will, okay? And one of the things they do is every time they buy a head of cattle, they actually hedge the selling price. They actually buy a future, so they know how much they're going to sell that beef for in 2 years when the cattle's mature and ready to go to market. It's a hedging process. It's a financial transaction. The other thing that they do is they hedge the futures on buying grain, and corn and grain and soy and things like that the cattle are going to consume over the next 24 months. It's an incredibly complex process. I did a value stream mapping activity with these guys, and I was just, this is one of the most intelligent organizations that I've ever worked for. More doctorates in that place than you would believe, from vets to financial guys to economists. Just mind-blowing how smart those old cowboys are. But there was no way that I was going to really, really understand hedging. I get it conceptually. My responsibility as a facilitator, internal or external, my responsibility was to walk the people through the improvement process.
Yeah. Mike, just as I can sort of add, when I've been in sort of similar sort of situations and trying to be the person in the room that tries to ask good questions. And then the other thing I would do is, like, I'd ask the question, there'd certainly be one of those, smart people would respond. Then I'd look at the faces around the room to see if everybody else, got it, or it was like, oh, that's, that's self-evident. Why is that consultant asking a question? And I'd back off, right? But a lot of times you're asking those questions, you're looking around, not everybody, gets it, right? And it's not being explained well. And if only one person in the room understands it, that's an opportunity to get in there and help everybody understand, right?
Yep, absolutely. And I think, now this is just my personality and my bias, so right or wrong, but it seems like it's been effective in my engagements. If I go in with a big ego, it's probably not going to be real effective. I am very self-effacing, and because it's right. I'm ignorant. And, to your question, to your observation your observation, Eric, about, asking some of those questions. Hey, I have permission to ask really stupid questions.
Yeah.
Ignorant questions, not stupid questions.
Yeah. Any other questions for Mike? Thanks, Judy.
Judy, did that help answer your question?
It did. It was interesting to hear about your technique, because I think that one of the things that's been tripping us up may be just sort of a kind of not backing off. Part of this process has been to really actively lead. It's an interesting mix of lean and not so lean. And there's been not as much clarity around purpose and so forth as there might have been. I think that's really been the downfall. And that coupled with there was not only a perception by the consultants, and by consultants I mean including consultants to our new parent company, that there was they even explained to us, there will be a lot of resistance in the beginning, et cetera, et cetera. And it was actually pretty funny, because as a technology company, we're used to change. I mean, it's our every day. And so we kind of went into it with an attitude of, hey, new stuff. Let's see what happens. Yeah. And but when we questioned, I felt like when we questioned some of the, here, do this, it's tried and true, and we questioned it because it wasn't very applicable to our particular situation, at least as it stands today, then it was like, oh, they're being resistant. Isn't that cute? And so I felt like, there was maybe a little misunderstanding, a little breakdown in communication among the leaders involved as to how the process should go.
Yeah, I'm a pretty strong believer that this stuff needs to be, the principles are there, but hey, technology company, you're not going to do what they do in manufacturing. You're not going to do what they do in a city government. You're not going to do what they do in the livestock yards. Right. We need to be adaptive, and I think a big piece of this needs to be, I'll say, even organic, as far as how it evolves inside an organization. If we're too prescriptive, people are going to be pushing back. What we need to do is give people the perspective, the tools, perhaps some experiential things, and we really want them to organically, almost pseudo-organically, identify the needs and the modes or the methods. But to your point, hey, you don't even understand the purpose. Boy, if you don't have alignment on the purpose, if there's not a common understanding there, then absolutely, I'm going to be confused. Why the heck are we even doing this if we haven't done a good job of communicating the purpose?
I have heard that question. Thank you. I actually really love the phrase pseudo-organic as well. I may have to quote you.
Okay. Don't get me in trouble, though, please.
No, I won't attribute it. I'll quote you mine.
All right. Hey, Charles, you got a question?
Yes. Hi, thanks for taking my question.
Hey, Charles, do we just lose you?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks for taking my question. Yeah, I was just kind of wondering what Mike, what your thoughts would be. It sounds like you've applied lean concepts and thinking in a lot of different industries and areas and been successful at it. And I was kind of curious about what your thoughts are about the future of lean, and where do you think it's headed? Is there a new industry that maybe it's that it's yet to be applied to, or somewhere where you think it could be very successful and no one has really tapped into it yet?
Good question. There's I can't think of an industry where they haven't tried. There's a bunch of industries out there where they're just barely scratching the surface. And these are two that really hit us hard in the pocketbook: government, and I think right now there's either 17 or 18 states out of the 50 that have formal lean initiatives, some of them with more traction, more success than others. But I still think there's major opportunities there at all levels: state, federal, local. So that's one. Another one is healthcare, which I think there's a lot more traction in healthcare. And believe it or not, healthcare is probably less bureaucratic than government. And it's more, there's a whole bunch of private or local government healthcare entities. And so I think there's some cool things happening there. They're fighting big egos within many of those organizations, and so it's a challenge, and it's kind of slow. But there's cool things happening there. Another area, I live in San Diego, I mentioned that before, but a big industry down here is biosciences, and that's an area that it's just slow. And I think, going back to Judy's comment about what's the purpose, these guys, it just seems like they're so flush in cash that it's hard for them to identify their burning platform. And so they're slow to change.
Yeah.
Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, well, and as we described, those big sort of opportunity areas, I think that's sort of one of the issues when organizations or things like government aren't real sort of clear on the purpose. It's real hard to get the organization aligned around the concept like lean. And it gets slightly better, though, as you move into healthcare and hospitals and, okay, we've got, mortality issues or whatever they might be that we're going to kind of, have this sort of common purpose to address. The fuzzier that purpose gets, the harder it is to push this lean stuff, I think, for organizations. Yeah. And maybe it's a hard question for some organizations because they have to really answer, are we really delivering value for our customers? Do we even know who our customers are? And if you don't have that, I don't know why are you doing lean in the first place? You got no value. So anyway.
Yeah, it's tough in that environment. Who is the customer? Is it the insurance company? That's who they're paying. Is it the doctors? Is it the patient? Is it the company that actually, I'm under XYZ company's plan? It's
right.
Who is the customer?
Yeah. It gets muddy. Charles, did that sort of answer your question?
That was, thank you for that information. There was a guest celebrity interview earlier in the course who was talking about the Department of Veterans Affairs and kind of echoed some of the similar statements that you made, and just, how overwhelming it is and how many different areas there are just within that single entity that need some attention.
Yeah. Charles, do you have any like pet organizations you'd like to sort of target some of this stuff at?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just saying, I was just sort of poking you a little bit. You got a target organization you should be looking at? Was there somebody on the list there you expected to hear about?
No, not necessarily. It sounded like Mike has worked in a lot of different areas. I mean, who would have thought, like cattle processing or, beef processing? I mean, that would have been the furthest from my mind. It seems like the one that we hear a lot about is healthcare. Yeah. And a lot of, I guess, all of the progress that has been made in that area. But, when I think of like a state or federal government, I guess I really didn't associate them with lean, applying lean to them as an organization. So I guess that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Michael, how about you for a question? You're always good for a good one.
Hey, thank you. I kind of wondered a little bit more about your consulting business. So how do you come on the scene and do you get hired by the organization, and then do they have a specific project in mind, or how do they contact you and how do they get you there? And then how do you choose what projects to do first?
So, like a consultant, I get to answer the first part of your question, Michael. How do you get there? With a consultant's answer, it depends. So, I'm typically, I don't market myself other than doing talks, and I guess writing books is a way to market yourself, but I'm not out there trying to convince people they should be lean. So almost all of my work is repeat business or referrals. How do I start and what do we do first? It does depend. It depends on the culture of the organization. Nowadays, it seems like a number of my clients have actually dabbled in this stuff before. And so they've tried to do it, and it's 3 years ago, and let's figure out what we should do. I think it depends in part upon who is reaching out. I have colleagues that will only talk with, the CEO or a C-suite person or maybe a VP, and they won't talk to a director or a manager or anything below. I guess I'm not that picky. Now, if a supervisor or something like that is probably, I'll talk to them, but say, hey, who else should we engage in the conversation? But typically I'm dealing with VPs or higher, but not always. Where do we start? It depends on the level of conviction of the highest level of the organization. If there's a CEO or a COO that truly has a lot of influence, we're going to start with something, where does it hurt? Let's do something that's going to have some impact. Let's put some resources at this in terms of people and effort and commitment to change. And we'll I'm doing one next week. It's a medium-sized aerospace manufacturer. The CEO he's been down this path before. It was a recent merger about a year ago. And he's like, we just got to get these guys off center. We got to kickstart them. And so we're kicking one of their key value streams. And next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we have the leadership team from that facility sequestered, and we're going to put together current state, future state maps, current state value stream map, a future state value stream map, and a transformation plan. And so when we walk out of there at the end of the day, Thursday, here's a plan that the leadership team agrees is what they should be working on for the next 6 months. Other organizations, maybe I go into a big organization. I've done stuff like with General Dynamics and things like that, and they might have a subsidiary where there's an influential, high-level middle manager who says, I want to do something out my shop floor. And so we'll say, hey, let's pick a model line. Let's do something. Let's train some folks. Let's do some Kaizen events. He knows where the opportunities are, and let's breed success by seeing success. But let's just start with a pilot or a model or something that's painful. Quite often it's lower risk than taking a whole value stream, and let's take it from there. So it's I think earlier when I was responding to Judy, I said something along the lines of, we got to learn the personality of the organization and these key players. And I think that's a key consideration, is trying to understand where they're at, where's their pain, what have they tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what's a good way for going forward. And I rely on them a lot to help give guidance in that area.
Yeah. Excellent.
Did I answer all of your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. Especially that last part. I foresee myself going into an organization where it needs restructuring from the top all the way through, and just kind of finding that point where to start can be hard. Or they hire you and they want you to do all this stuff, but then they don't want to make the changes to actually improve. So it's kind of hard to find that starting point. But I think what you said of kind of starting small and creating a lot of mini successes is a better way to take it on.
Right.
Yeah, especially if there's some resistance or lack of understanding within the organization.
Right.
And I think something else that's important, Charlie, right?
Michael is who you're talking
Oh,
to.
Michael, how can I forget that? Jeez. Must be the end of the day or something. I think something that's really important is that we aren't doing it to them. I use a line when I talk about Kaizen events. I say it can be really fun to Kaizen, and it can be really traumatic to be Kaizened. And so it's critical that as a consultant, I don't take this too literally, but I for the most part, I don't make recommendations.
Yeah.
I'm going to walk them through the critical process of understanding what's going on, what are the issues, blah blah blah. But they really need to be coming up with the recommendations, because. So I'm with these guys for 3 days next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you know what happens on Friday? I'm not there.
Yeah.
And so if it's Mike's plan, it can die on the vine like that. And if it's Mike's plan, it's probably wrong.
Yeah. No, they've got to own it.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
let's see. So Judy, last question.
Yeah, I just have one little follow-up question to Michael's question. I missed one little piece, well, maybe big piece. When you were talking about kidnapping the leadership team and doing a process with them, and I get it that most of them would not necessarily have been in favor of that. At whose behest was that done?
The CEO.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes it a little bit more enforceable. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
And sometimes, and now this gentleman, he knew it. He'd been down the path. He'd been through the transformations. He recognized that having somebody help with the facilitation and planning and, a method was effective. And so he got it. Sometimes it's a bit of a sales pitch. Sometimes CEOs or, C-suite folks, COOs, whatever it might be, they get it. They've read about it. They believe in it, but they don't, I shouldn't have said they get it. They've read about it. They want the results, but they don't understand really what's required to get there. So sometimes it can be kind of challenging convincing them that I need your team for 3 days.
Right. All right. Well, Mike, we've kind of, let's see. So I got my little timer here that I'm sort of watching. So we're probably at the 50-minute mark, which was a little bit longer than we normally sort of go on these celebrity interviews. But it's been great talking to you. Do you have any parting bit of advice for these guys just starting out on their lean journey?
So I've got a feeling some of you guys are internal and some of you maybe aren't. I don't know. But one of the things, I did a talk at just the regular business college some months back at San Diego State, and was a guest speaker with one of the professors. And one of the things I shared with them, because they're kind of naive, they're 20, 21, 22. They've had a job. It was probably at McDonald's or, whatever. And number one is recognize the fact that common sense isn't very common out in the real world.
Right.
So, but recognizing that we can't go in and expect that we're going to change the world. We need to figure out how to engage these guys and get them to recognize that there's opportunity, there's a reason to change, and this is actually good for us and good for me. So that's one thing. I think another is humility is very, very powerful. And going in, it's not an act. Just recognize that I don't know. Maybe I've got an idea what the right questions are to ask, but I don't know what the right thing is for different places within my organization in terms of improvement. But we only get there through engaging people and busting down those silos. If we're trying to fix a department, that might get us somewhere, but it's not nowhere near going to get us to where we need to be. So it's about how we think from a philosophy perspective. It's how we work from an operating system perspective. And Lean is about how we solve problems as a management system. So it's fun. I've been at it for close to 20 years, and I can't imagine how much I'm going to learn next week in my 3-day value stream mapping activity, because I always learn something in these things. So never stop learning.
Okay. Well, excellent, Mike. Thank you so much for talking to us tonight. I know my students sort of really appreciate it, and I always learn something when I talk to you. So, so thanks once again.
You're very welcome, and you guys have fun. Thanks, Eric.
All right. Take care.
Cheers, buddy. Bye-bye. I'm signing off.
Bye-bye. All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording here at this point.